Remember, even when you hit the main disconnect, those lugs from the main connectors coming from your meter base are still live. Taking a 2 1/4 inch hole saw on the back side, I'm lining that up and you'll see the drill bit poke through there. And now we'll focus in and I'll complete the cut, pulling out that wood piece from the stud. Then from the back side, I can take my flathead screwdriver and knock out that blank, remove it with my Knipex, and then from the front side, I'm going to knock out the next ring so I can fit my 1.5" PVC conduit. Now I will do a dry fit just to make sure everything lines up here by putting my fitting in from the back side, confirming that we're good to go. Now, is this exact path and plan of attack going to work out for you? Not necessarily. Now remember, I'm using a 100 amp to feed from my main panel to my sub panel. So because I'm using a 100 amp breaker, that means I need 2 gauge conductors. So I'm going to have two 2 gauge conductors for my hots, 1 2 gauge conductor for my neutral, and then a 6 gauge for the bare ground. Those are going to be running through my Schedule 40 PVC from the side of my main panel, and then that's going to be up through the bottom, same knockout in the bottom of the sub panel here. So that's going to have a nice elbow running, giving me a path for those wires. Now alternatively, if you were just using a 60 amp breaker, you might be able to go with a 6 gauge Romex, getting clamps exiting your main panel, clamp entering your sub panel, and then that might get you the wire you need to now feed your sub panel from your main panel. And that can give you some additional flexibility opposed to using like a conduit, which is going to be a little bit more rigid and restricted. For me, I went with Schedule 40 PVC conduit, which is going to give me a nice protected path from my main panel to my sub panel, and then it also gives me the capacity I needed. Now I needed to do a little bit of modifications. I was able to take just a standard 90 degree and modify that, just cutting it slightly shorter to make sure that it lined up coming out of the side of that main panel to the bottom of my sub panel, and then just gluing on the 2 fittings so I'll be able to thread those in and secure them to each of the panels. Now I went with 1.5" because 1.5" Schedule 40 PVC is going to have capacity for 6 2 gauge conductors. Now remember, I have 3 2 gauge conductors, then I have a 6 gauge bare copper, and then that gives me a little bit more capacity to run some 12 gauge because I need to move 2 circuits from main panel over to sub panel, and then that's going to give me my opening for my 100 amp breaker. That's going to be the main feeder breaker for the sub panel. All right, so now I'm going to secure all this up so we can get that sub panel set and start running some wires. So I'll place this elbow first into the main panel, just threading that through and starting to thread the nut on. I will not tighten it yet because I want a little bit of play while we set this sub panel. Setting a sub panel in place. Now I'll go ahead and secure that with 4 screws. Now I'm only using 1.5" screws because I do not want to penetrate through further than the stud, especially with the main panel on the right hand side. And then it'll be slightly offset in from the drywall, about 1/4 inch. Once that's secure, then we'll place the nuts on both ends, tap those to tighten them up, finishing off with the plastic bushings to protect the wire. Here's what the finished product looks like, and now we have a nice 1.5" piece of conduit between the 2 panels. Now, since this is a sub panel, we do not want to bring our grounds and neutrals together on the same bar. So this is going to be your neutral bar. We're going to bring our 2 gauge neutral conductor right into this lug, and then we want to actually install a separate grounding bar, which is easy enough, and there's actually small nubs or holes. So if you set this on 2 nubs, you actually only need 1 mounting screw to get that securely attached to your sub panel. And then